She called it yoga for one. I found her stream a month ago, during a rare confluence of self-disdain and spare time that collided into something resembling motivation. Tucked between the kickboxing classes and the home gym meatheads was her thumbnail. It caught my eye. It was a simple shot of her face, so near to the camera that I could count the freckles, her teeth a little too large for her mouth, and her nose ever so slightly crooked. I've never been the type of guy to consider yoga, but I tuned in, and in a matter of seconds, I was entranced. The girl was in her living room, a haphazard mise-en scene, the floor speckled with sad little plants and stacks of magazines. She posed with her hands on the floor and her hips thrust in the air, her butt perched in the center of the screen. I decided to stay a while. I had no yoga mat, so I laid out a towel. It was difficult to follow along. She talked a lot, and only a fraction of it was about the routine. Press your heels together and bend your head to your feet, breathing deeply. My feet smell like peaches and cream today. Makes me want to gobble them up. I love summer peaches. I love biting into them and feeling the juice erupt in my mouth. It reminds me of the time when, and I fell into the meditative quagmire woven by her words, inhaling the scent of my own socks, failing to notice she'd moved into a different pose. After a while, my muscles trembled with the effort of supporting my soft body in these unfamiliar positions, so I called it a day. It was then that I noticed it. Subscribers, 1. That was me. I was the only one watching. I felt an inexplicable flood of guilt when I closed the browser, like I was abandoning her. I checked back into her channel the next few afternoons. It was the strangest thing. She was always streaming. She was either unaware of my presence or apathetic to it. Her ramblings, so freewheeling that they approached random word association, didn't seem to change whether I was there or not. She was often mid-sentence when I logged in. She was flirty in a way that made it clear she wasn't trying to be charmingly raw in her tendency to fumble instructions. Curiosity overwhelmed me. I yearned to discover more about this fascinating creature. Her movements drew me in, like she was grasping at me through the screen. I marveled at the feeling of being her silent voyeur. I developed more comfort with the basic poses, though I still couldn't get my hands anywhere near my toes. Too soon she notched up the level of difficulty. She eased herself into the splits, each leg outstretched, her toes pointed at perfect right angles. I tried my best to replicate the pose, my groin protesting the pressure. Each day she pushed a little farther. She curved her spine sharply behind her, a graceful arc. She lifted her back leg high into the air, at an angle that seemed to wrench her hip out of place. I forced my body into the closest approximations of her geometry that my tendons would allow. My teeth gritted against the sharp warnings issued by my nerves. At night I dreamed that she was breaking my joints, cracking my limbs into the clean shapes that she maintained so effortlessly. One day she twisted her arms so far behind her that I felt sympathetic pain, and folded herself up so that her bent legs swooped around her shoulders, touching her toes behind her neck. She smiled at the camera, demurely politely. "You want to see me bend into a pretzel, don't you?" she asked. Aston, that was the first time she addressed me. I would forget to eat. I'd wake up on the couch, having dozed off, and she would be murmuring about pomegranates while her forehead brushed her knees. Did she sleep? Did she eat? I saw no evidence of it. Every time I moved, my body ached with the memory of being stretched to its limit. I was spending 10, 12, 14 hours a day on her stream. She spoke to me frequently. "I know you've been watching me. I think you like watching me. How far do you want me to twist for you?" The fluid shifting of her body into vertices and curves and delicate polygons was hypnotizing. I was getting lost in the light of a flickering flame as it swirled into different patterns. I was working myself into something more pliable, molding myself into something like her image. It's difficult to pinpoint the moment she went too far. It was more like the creep of quicksand than any one single point. She would lie on her back and lift herself on the palms and soles of her feet, her torso thrusting at the ceiling like she was something from The Exorcist. She would inch her hands and feet closer together, folding her body backwards on itself until she was nearly split in half. And then she would skitter forward until the whites of her eyes flooded the screen, scaring me so much that I jumped, and she would laugh, as if she had made a joke. She would twist her head around like an owl and thrust it between her thighs, always blinking at the screen, always smiling like we were sharing some inside secret, like I was in on the sly conspiracy. She said, "You like this, don't you, Mr. Smith? Am I your foldable pocket toy?" Smith is a very common last name. There was a non-zero chance she'd just guessed correctly, but this freaked me out enough to slam the laptop shut, shattering the image of her toothy smile. I tried to resume normal life, but I had almost nothing to fill my time except television and social media, and filling out applications for jobs I'd never want to work. A strange sensation tickled at me like something was wrong, like I was forgetting something. And powerful waves of guilt, the same guilt I'd felt when I closed her stream the first day I'd found her. I tried not to. I really tried to stay away, but the urge overwhelmed me, so I returned. For the first time, she wasn't on screen when I logged in. I peered closer at the scene, seeing the familiar yoga mat on the ground, the coffee table, the magazines. There was a soft noise coming from just off screen, a muffled noise, irregular and halting, a human voice. I turned the volume all the way up, and I couldn't tell if it was laughter or crying. Feeling sick, I closed the stream. This brings us to yesterday. I had spent countless hours thinking about her, wondering what she was doing, whether she was still telling stories to her invisible visitor. I logged in. Her eyes filled the webcam's field of vision so suddenly that I scrambled backwards, and that sound echoing around the walls of her apartment and mine. And it was now clear that it was a sound of misery. Her moan was wordless, and as her face backed away, I saw why. Her bare foot was stuffed halfway in her mouth, her jaw nearly unhinged to accommodate it, the ball wedged between her teeth. Tears were streaming down her face, pooling around the corners of her stretched lips. Her arms were folded behind her head, and her other leg was tucked under the first. She was struggling, and I realized that she was stuck. She was trapped in that position, a twisted ball of limbs and strained joints, unable to speak. I stared slack-jawed at the screen, and her eyes met mine, seeming to blink in recognition. The force of her sobs crescendoed. In relief, I wasn't sure. I had no idea what to do. I didn't know her name or where she lived. I didn't even know for sure that she was in the same country. I sat frozen for long moments, watching the twitching of her limbs as she tried to wrench herself out of the cage her body made. Then it struck me. I could type. "Can you type your address?" The message pinged its arrival at her computer. Our first real communication. She shook her head almost imperceptibly, with the slight range of motion her position allowed. I tried again. "Can you type with your nose?" Her eyes flickered across the page as she read my words. With great effort, she rocked herself over, landing face first on the keyboard. "Siviosh Juso," she typed. My heart pounding, I said, "Try again." I watched as she managed to prop herself precariously on one shoulder. Her body was convulsing with the force of her sobs. Eventually, she leaned forward carefully, delicately, and pressed the tip of her nose to the keys. 3. Bye. Yes, that was it. That's great. Give me another number. We traded for long, suspenseful minutes, her giving me one number or letter at a time, me writing them down and encouraging her as best I could. "You're doing great. I'm here with you. Help is on the way." She had cobbled together a number and a street. It had taken us nearly an hour to get to this point. She had just finished typing app 12 when she stopped, trembling with the effort of keeping herself upright, and we met eyes again through the camera, hers shining with pain and fear. And then she collapsed. She rolled out of sight. Panicking, I sent her dozens of frantic messages. "What city? What state? Stay with me. I'm here. Where are you? I need more." It became clear that no more was coming. Her sobs stilled, her breath quieted. I searched the address and found every city in the country where the address she'd given me existed. I called every police station in every jurisdiction within range. It took a lot of explanation, but after hours of work there was nothing I could do but sit and wait nervously by the phone and stare at the empty apartment framed within my laptop screen. All I could do was type, "I'm here with you. You'll be safe. This will be over soon. On. You're not alone." The ringing of the phone nearly sent me out of my skin. It was 1 a.m. Did you find her? I asked desperately, scanning the scene for any sign of activity. "Tell me she's all right." A voice on the other end of the line sighed, a deep sigh of sadness or frustration I couldn't say. "We found her," he said, his words gentle but guarded. "Stuck in that position as you described. She's not okay. She died of dehydration." "She what? No, that's not possible. I just spoke to her." "I don't know what you saw, son. I truly don't. But the girl we found has been dead for a month." Next story. I no sleep. My friend was brutally murdered in her sleep this weekend. When the police found her, she was lying on top of her duvet covered in her own blood with a slit in her throat. No trace was found of her killer. Upon retrieving some things for her family today, I stumbled across her diary. What you will read below is her account of the last 7 days of her life. Monday, July 9th, 2018. A dear diary, I guess. I don't really know how I'm supposed to start this thing. The therapist recommended I acquire some kind of journal to help catalog my thoughts. It's supposed to keep me grounded and in the present if I start to have another panic attack. So here we are. It's Monday the 9th and I'm supposed to be at work right now, except I'm not. I moved house today to a new build condo in a quiet suburban street. I had something of a mental breakdown earlier on this year that left me hyperventilating on the wrong side of the guardrail on the Golden Gate Bridge. It took 2 agonizing hours of talking to a police officer to convince me not to embrace the void and to choose life instead. I was then immediately whisked away to a hospital to be evaluated by a psychiatrist. The next day, I went home and immediately listed my apartment for sale. There were too many memories left there that I didn't want to keep, and I needed a fresh start. My new place is exactly what the doctor ordered. It's a modern 2 up, 2 down. I think that's what it's called, townhouse. It really has all the things a growing millennial needs. USB ports in every outlet, high-speed Wi-Fi, good cell reception. I'm in love with the place. There's an open-plan kitchen and living area towards the back with these amazing floor-to-ceiling sliding glass doors. These lead on to a cute little deck and a tiny patch of grass I'm told is called a lawn. I wouldn't know. I've only ever lived in apartments. Towards the front there's a spare room which, until I have more money, is going to remain unfurnished. It will probably just end up as a storage closet for the stuff I couldn't leave behind me when I moved, but definitely don't have a need for. Heading upstairs, which is honestly more of a mezzanine, there's my bedroom and bathroom. The bedroom sits at the back of the house above the deck, and the bathroom takes up the front. The whole place is wide open, spacious, and it lets the light in. It feels like my soul is taking a big breath of fresh air. I have a neighbor, and I'd assume that their house is a mirror image of mine. I've not met them yet, but I hope that I bump into them soon. A little human contact couldn't go far amiss in my new life. I guess I should go and unpack some more of my stuff. It should help to ease my anxiety about my new place if everything is in some kind of order. Do you say goodbye to a diary? I have absolutely no idea. There needs to be a guide about diary etiquette online somewhere. So it's like 10:30 p.m.-ish. I've just got back to my room after a frantic search around the house for my breaker box. Can you believe it? 12 hours in the house and I get a power cut. I fell asleep with the landing light on, and I guess the sudden absence of light woke me up. I jumped out of bed and initially thought I was blind. Suburbia is really dark at night. My eyes eventually adjusted enough to penetrate the darkness. I fumbled my way down the stairs into the kitchen and grabbed the flashlight off of the fridge. It's one of those cheap magnetic ones. I received it as a gift in a stocking one Christmas. I flicked it on and scanned the kitchen for the breaker box. It wasn't in the kitchen or the living room. It was in the spare bedroom, behind 4 boxes of my junk. I moved the boxes and lifted the lid to the breaker switches, but nothing had tripped. I was just thinking about which number I'd need to dial to get some kind of idea of the situation when there was a dull thud followed by a sharp click. Confused and out of sorts in unfamiliar surroundings, I held my breath for about 5 seconds, and then I heard the hum of the fridge. The power was back on. I emerged from the spare room into the partially illuminated kitchen and approached the fridge to reattach the flashlight. I thought I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. Just as I was about to turn and head for the stairs, it looked like there was a figure out on the deck. I rushed for the outdoor light switch. It was one of those really bright halogen security lights. They're usually activated by proximity, but need to be reset in the event of a power cut. There was a burst of light onto the deck and the lawn behind it. There wasn't a trace of anything. No figure, no footsteps, not even any poop from an animal. Whatever shadow I thought I had seen evaporated like mist. I think I'm losing it again. Already, Tuesday, July 10th, 2018. Hello, diary. I apologize for my minor outburst last night. The internet tells me that what I experienced was a rolling blackout, and I guess my mind was just playing tricks on me. Today is my first day back at work after a week off, so I'm stressed and honestly a little anxious about that. I work as a graphical artist for a bank. I produce their advertisements and customer-facing posters and emails. It's really fun work, but there are tight deadlines and I'm constantly trying to please everyone. Hopefully my first day back isn't quite so intense. With a bit of luck, I won't have to endure another power cut tonight. Diary, there's a footprint on my deck. Not a set or a trail of footprints, just one enormous, muddy boot print right outside the sliding doors. If I were to put my foot where the print sits and close the doors, my toe would be pressed right against them. Someone was stood at my door. I didn't catch it last night because it was dark and the deck is stained a deep chestnut color. I don't know what to do. I've called the police, but they completely dismissed me. I'm sorry, ma'am, there's nothing we can do without an intruder actually present. I called my friend Matt to stay over for the night. He said he'll crash on the couch, which makes me feel a little more secure. I think if I can spend one night in the house without a disturbance, I'll feel better. At the end of the day, it was one boot print. It might have been there before I even moved in, for all I know. I'll have forgotten all about it in the morning. Wish me luck, diary. I'm turning in for the night. Wednesday, July 11th, 2018. Good morning, diary. I slept like a log last night. No nightmares featuring big-footed, muddy intruders inexplicably appearing on my deck. I found Matt sat at my breakfast bar upon my arrival to the kitchen. He claims he didn't experience anything out of the ordinary last night aside from some creaking in the house. With it being a new build, I'm willing to put this down to the house settling or me turning over in my sleep. I'm feeling incredibly positive today. I'm falling in love with the new house. I'm starting to feel safe, and I've just had breakfast and coffee before work for the first time in years. I'll be late home from work tonight. I've been invited for drinks with some colleagues as a sort of welcome back celebration. It'll be nice to get out of my head for a while, even if it is aided by alcohol. Thursday, July 12th, 2018. The back door was open this morning. I came downstairs to get a glass of water and some painkillers to alleviate the headache I had as a result of last night's antics. A thoroughly deserved headache, I might add. I felt the cool morning air raise goose pimples on my neck and make the hairs on my arms stand on end before I reached the bottom of the stairs and located the source of the chill as I rounded the corner. I don't remember much of last night after getting home, but I'm fairly confident I didn't touch the door. I'm not a smoker and I haven't owned a pet for years, so there was no logical reason for me to have opened the back door last night at all, let alone leave it wide open. I'm going to the hardware store immediately to pick up new, heavy-duty locks, and I've got a locksmith arriving later on this afternoon to install them. I have an appointment scheduled with a security company later on this week to get an alarm system installed with a remote panic button. This situation is slowly deteriorating into something that I can't explain away as month-old footprints and strange sleeping behaviors. I'm going to go around to the neighbor and see if they've heard or experienced anything similar. I definitely feel better if I have a nearby friendly face that I can turn to for support. I can't keep calling Matt every time I make a stupid mistake when I've had one too many daiquiris. I don't think anybody lives next door. I knocked on the door and rang the doorbell, which still worked, surprisingly, and received no answer. After some observation, the house was absolutely spotless externally and internally. I'm not sure that it was ever inhabited. Every window on the ground floor is covered with a pair of heavy blackout curtains, except for one, the front room. Peering through the window, I could make out a solitary wooden chair in the middle of the room. Facing the window, I saw no evidence of any other furniture, past or present. There were no indentations on the carpet, no empty boxes, no discoloration on the walls. It looked as if the house had remained untouched since it was built earlier this year. I don't feel comfortable about this at all. Something just doesn't feel right. I'm going to ask some of the other people in the neighborhood about the house and see if they can shine some light on this for me. In the meantime, I'm going to invest in a safety chain for my front door. I don't feel safe anymore. Friday, July 13th, 2018. Friday the 13th. One of only 2 unlucky days this year. I'd like to say that I don't believe in superstition, especially as my therapist believes that it doesn't have positive effects on my mental health. However, today has been extremely negative for me, so declining attention at work has caused them to put me on a short stress leave. So my supervisor believes that I may have returned to work a little too soon, and so I've been told to take this Saturday and the entirety of next week off to get my shit together. I think I'm just going to spend the entire time in bed. I don't have the energy for anything else. My locksmith hasn't been able to get out to my house yet either. It's apparently break-in season, whatever that means, and he's been snowed under with lock changes. I've bought and attached a safety chain to my door. It's funny, I don't even know what I'm trying to keep out at this point. I just want to feel comfortable in my new home. It happened again. There's no way this is a coincidence. 2 power cuts in 5 days in a new build. I can't rationally explain this away. I wasn't even asleep this time. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and fantasizing about the Golden Gate Bridge when my thoughts were rudely interrupted by a sharp click and a dull thud from outside. I was plunged into almost complete darkness and started to panic. My heart started pounding like it was attempting to crack open my sternum and escape my chest. My breathing became shallow and rapid, like oxygen was suddenly in short supply, and I needed every molecule that was available to me. I sat bolt upright, no longer in my stupor, but suddenly very alert. I listened hard for any sound that might seem out of the ordinary. I couldn't hear anything over the sound of my own breathing and the constant pounding drumbeat in my chest. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and gingerly dropped my feet onto the carpet. I had recently relocated the flashlight to my bedside drawer, and I hastily retrieved it. After a few seconds of fumbling around with shaky hands, I found the on switch, and the darkness gave way to an orange glow that now felt familiar and offered a tiny scrap of comfort for my jangled nerves. There was a creak from downstairs. I entered the landing and listened with bated breath. I wasn't sure if I was preparing to run or to club an assailant with my tiny flashlight, but I was prepared for something. No sounds. I crept down the stairs, one at a time, listening for the faintest sound. After 5 minutes of silence, I was satisfied that my kitchen was free of intruders. I approached the back door and gave the latch a solid tug. It was locked tight. I headed to the front door and ensured the safety chain was still secure. I'd left the boxes out of the way from last time. If I'm honest, I haven't had the energy to rearrange or unpack them. Unsurprisingly, the switches were all up. In my complete panic, I had dialed 911. Feeling my cheeks flush a little with embarrassment and regretting having been so hasty, I retired to the couch to await the arrival of the police and thought of what I would tell them to convince them I wasn't either crazy or wasting their time. The police arrived with a knock at the door. I approached cautiously and opened a tiny crack through which I could check that they were actually police. And when I was sure, I carefully slid back the safety chain and eased the door open for them to come in and search the house for intruders. They seemed distracted with something else, and as if they had better things to be doing, which they probably did. Their search was basic, checking under beds and wardrobes, with just a cursory glance into the bathroom. I was left with a copy of a police report and the instructions to dial 900 again if I felt unsafe. Sleep came for me there on the couch around 2 a.m. and I awoke with a start just now at 5:35. I'm tired and I need coffee. Fuck this house diary. Saturday, July 14th, 2018. It's around 4 p.m. now and I'm too tired to function. Still no word from the locksmith or the security company. I'm not sure this police report will protect me if push comes to shove. I spent the past few hours on the phone making plans to get out of here. I have an Airbnb from tomorrow and 5 apartment viewings this week. I'll have to rent this place out and write off my plans of my dream home. I'm going to pack everything I need and get an early night. I'm leaving very early tomorrow as I have a pretty decent drive to make. On the move again. I hope this isn't going to be a reoccurring theme for me. Sunday, July 15th, 2018. Hi there, diary. I did not move out this morning. I found myself unable to leave my bed and unavailable to answer the phone. I made some mistakes this week, diary. I think it was good that I bought a security chain for the door. It's smart, cheap, and simple. Double-checking doors and windows is also a great plan when one fears an intruder. The security system would have proven to be overpriced and ineffective had it arrived before my departure. The new fancy deadbolt would have appeared to have been of little use also. These things only serve to keep intruders out. My first mistake was checking in on the house next door. I forgot to lock my door, or maybe it didn't occur to me as necessary. I was only feet away, right? What could possibly happen? So my second mistake was falling asleep on the sofa yesterday morning. It was careless. I was exhausted from my ordeal, and after seeing off the police officers, I'd neglected to reset the chain on the door. But my final mistake was being so loud on my phone throughout the day on Saturday. Anybody could have heard my plans to leave. And so quickly, too. It was almost like I was fleeing. That would have been smart. You see, I was right in my Friday panic. There was a reason to be scared. He was hiding behind the shower curtain. The police didn't see the muddy print on the floor, nor did they see the sprinkles of dirt on the bath mat. They didn't even turn the light on. When I left for coffee, my uninvited house guest crept under my bed and waited. When I retired to bed early, he waited for my breathing to become slow and deep. He then emerged, slowly and silently. He rose up beside the bed like a ghoul and produced a blade, a beautiful thing, obsessively cleaned and meticulously maintained. The blade was pressed against my throat for a brief second before it glided across, and all my blood spilled out. I gasped for breath. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. With my eyes wide and my hands clasping at my throat, trying in vain to staunch the crimson flow, I'd imagine my last thought was a wish that I'd spent a little extra cash and got that Airbnb one night earlier. My life faded and I collapsed, motionless on top of my duvet. The man then reached under my mattress, produced my diary and proceeded to fill in my final day. Wouldn't it be such a shame if I'd ended the week on a Saturday? NB. If you are reading this, maybe check behind your shower curtain before locking yourself in for the night. Next story. It's not easy living in the city. Everything is expensive. Commutes are bustling and rent is extortionate, especially when you're working as a butcher in a small area of downtown. It's especially harder when you have your childhood dog that you care deeply for. I can't bring myself to give him up, even though deep down I know it's the best option. So when looking for a place, I first had to find somewhere that'll allow an animal, which removed most options straight away, and then I have to find one that's remotely in my price range. I succeeded, but at the severe cost of quality. So my place is a dingy upper floor apartment in an area awkwardly far away from anything interesting, but I make it work. A blessing is actually the job. Though the pay is as mediocre, the benefit was that the head butcher would let me keep scraps for the dog and occasionally would let me take an off-cut or two for myself. He empathized my position and has been such a blessing over the months. For the most part, the bog buster lives off the cheap, dry food I can just about afford at the local corner store. Things have been rough though. Recently, Buster has been acting strange lately. I'd always see him pawing at the fridge, which is understandable when I know he wants his weekly meats. But sometimes he'll start pawing at the bag of dried food. For the longest time, he'd never come back for more, even if he wasn't full. The dried food wasn't the best quality, so it was easy for him to eat enough and be content. One day though, I gave him his goodbye hug, which he feebly returned. He seemed to be fatigued, but I took it as him just waking up. I had a usual day at work when my boss pulled me aside. Bless him, he gave me a bit of a pick-me-up speech and handed me a bag of mixed cuts, some for me and some for the dog. It was far more than what he'd usually give me, and this was after he gave me my usual cuts the day before. I didn't know what to say at first, wanting to politely decline, but knowing how much I needed it. Picking up on this, he just gave me a pat on the back, which urged me out the door. I turned and shot back the same smile he gave me as I left to go home. Knowing the stress I lived with on a constant level, it was a breath of fresh air to have someone who had my back. I happily stored it away, gave Buster some cuts, and went to bed. The next day wasn't so great. When I came home from work, I could hear a faint whining through the door. I cautiously entered to see Buster curled up in the corner, seemingly distraught. I started looking around and saw small claw marks around the skirting boards. It looked like he'd been scratching around the walls. I hoped to God it wasn't rodents in the walls. But when I turned the corner to investigate more, my stomach dropped. The small floor fridge I owned was wide open, its contents warming in the mildew air. As I went to shove it closed, I noticed something missing. The generous butcher's bag of meat I was given the day prior. My heart dropped. Did Buster do this? This was a behavior I'd never seen before. However, he'd been showing strange signs towards his dry food and was acting coy when I looked at him. I couldn't scold him since he wasn't caught in the act, so I resigned myself to my spare meal of instant noodles. Buster had nothing to eat that night. I couldn't say anything about it at work the next day. It would seem so unbelievable to tell my boss that my dog had eaten the whole bag, so when he asked how I was enjoying the meat, I lied that they were great, and I was happy to have eaten well for once. His face was warmed, though my emotions were cold. So when I came home, all that welcomed me was a sad dog and more scratches. The first ones were barely visible. However, these newer ones ran deeper. I yelled at Buster and pointed towards them. I didn't know if he got what I was communicating, and eventually gave up. I went to bed hungry that day. It was another few shifts before my boss pulled me to his office. On his table was a bag smaller than the last, waiting for me. I could tell that he couldn't keep getting away with generous donations, so it looked like he was being more reserved this time. We caught up a bit, and I left, a few pounds heavier, and came home to cool it in the fridge right away. Buster immediately seemed eager at the bit to snap up what was in the bag. But it wasn't one of his meat days, so I made sure to put it in the fridge to stop any more incidents happening. I took the fridge out the kitchen and left it on the small dining table I had, so it was no longer on ground level. It looked messy. I'm sure if I had anyone over, it would have looked like such a scuffed setup, but luckily no one ever came over, so I had no reason to be self-conscious. This was my assurance that everything would be fine the next day. Things were not fine the next day. Eager to have a meat day with the dog when I came home from work, I saw the table had been banged up, grooves etched in on its edge, and the fridge was raided. There was no way he could have gotten the meats. The table space was much too small. and Buster wasn't known for his agility nor dexterity, but I couldn't deny the facts in front of me. The fridge was emptied of all my butcher's products. I scolded him once more. He acted repentant, but he always did when I took that tone. Days went by and the scratches got worse. I would find them gored in the walls around shin height, some deep into the plaster. Upon seeing them, my blood would boil at the thought of losing my deposit check, and as if he could smell the money in the air, there was a knock on the door. When I answered, I was met with a surprise visit from the building's landlord, here to make an unwarranted inspection and to bother me about rent. Usually these went by smoothly, but I didn't want him to see the damage Buster had made. Despite him always asking to enter, he seemed to take my reluctance as a challenge and pushed past, his weight far more overbearing than mine. His frame wafted past me, followed by his warm odor. He was the visage of gluttony. His skin seemed to be in a perpetual state of sheen from grease, his arms a tangle of dark coarse hair. His face has probably never seen a clean shave in his life. I don't know what was cleaned less, the apartment or his clothes, both of which were marred with permanent stains with no attempt to rectify. But once inside he saw the mess, the fridge haphazardly hanging on the table, the furniture damaged with fine grooves, and the walls littered the divots and straight carvings. Boy, did he have a field day to went around adding up the costs. And by that I mean he'd just make up prices with every scratch he saw, which added up to almost exactly what my deposit was, minus some change. It was frustrating, yet strangely convenient. He then sent a scouring look at the dog. The dirtiest look, despite Buster not having the capacity to understand it. My mind raced back to all the times he complained about Buster. I've always known him to being a quiet dog, yet my landlord would always complain that he'd bark incessantly when I was out. It woke him up in the early hours of the afternoon. Seems every day was a lie-in for him. I'd argue back that he didn't bark or that the afternoon is not a time for a proper noise complaint, but he'd hear nothing of it. All he did was collected rent from this inherited block and do nothing all day. Anything that intervened with his lazy lifestyle was an issue to him. In the end of his route, he pulled open my fridge and had a look around. I was confused until he said, "Any meat for me here?" as he stared at the shelves hungrily. No, I told him, which he seemed to turn away at, and took his leave. Why did he come in just as the scratches started? And why did he specifically look for meat? It was weird. Untired, sword. Still, I now had the headache on my mind of trying to either repair the damages with what little funds I had or forego my deposit when I inevitably leave this place. Days went on and the scratches mounted up. They started small and low, almost like a cat's. However, they progressed higher and higher up the wall, now sitting at knee height and deeper than before. On a particular day, I came in with my bagged meat. Just as I was closing the door, a meaty foot held it in place. There was no stopping my landlord from waddling his way in. He hummed to himself as he looked around, furrowing his whole face as he scrutinized all the damages he could see just from the entryway. Once he started going off about the damages, he didn't stop for almost half an hour. In the end, I asked him to leave so I could settle in. And that's when he started eyeing up the butcher's bag I still had in my hand. In my heart, I knew I didn't want to give it up. This was my dog a nice treat for the week. This was special. But he very quickly pulled the damages card and offered to lower the cost if he could have a cut. I reluctantly gave him a slice, and he happily left, knowing he now had infinite power over me. To avoid the dangers of the fridge raid, I cooked the meat that night and gave Buster his treats. He ate it almost too quickly, acting like he hadn't eaten in days, despite his food bowl being empty every time I came back, which was strange, as he usually savored his meat as much as I did. As I lay in bed, my mind started running everything back, the cuts that just kept appearing, the meat that kept going missing, and Buster acting like he hadn't eaten in a while. It didn't add up. After a while of this routine, something new happened. Buster started acting strange. He wouldn't greet me in the mornings or evenings with the same gusto. He seemed thinner and didn't have the same spark of joy he once carried. I was worried his age was getting to him, or he got a bug. But a vet visit was out of the question unless absolutely necessary. However, it became necessary. I came home to find Buster collapsed. He was breathing, but barely. I quickly scooped him up and rushed to the nearest vet I could find online. The whole way there, all I could think about was how this happened. It started with the possibility that the meats were upsetting his digestive system, or maybe there was something in the walls that was bothering him and was what he was trying to scratch at. But the worst thought was the idea that this was my landlord's way of making one of his mild grievances go away. The wait wasn't too long on paper, but with my mind racing, time elongated to forever. Eventually he was seen to, and they ran their tests. After a while, one of the nurses came out and started asking me questions. She asked me about his eating habits and what he'd eaten recently. And my heart dropped and I told her everything. However, she seemed puzzled at this. She informed me that the reason he was sick was that Buster was malnourished. They said it seemed like he hadn't eaten properly in a long time. I protested this with the fact that his food bowl would be empty every time I came home, and he would steal from the fridge, but I couldn't argue with the physical facts in front of me. I was left to take a newly fed Buster slowly home with the shame of looking like a bad owner. Once back, I decided to test him a little and poured out a little bit of food on his plate. He seemed reluctant at first, despite looking ravenously hungry. After a while of looking around, once he had the assurance I was looking, he hungrily lapped it all down. I was content knowing he'd now eaten, but this only added to the confusing situation unfolding. That night, all I could do was think about everything I knew so far. That the landlord seemed to conveniently and we come in when the scratches started. He always gave me backhanded comments about Buster. He seemed to know about my meat takings and took a liking to the cuts I had. My theory was this: he was sabotaging the apartment and stealing the meat from the fridge. Once I started eating the meat right away, he started extorting me for slices, knowing I was forced to take the offer. With Buster gone, there'd be more meat, and as a bonus, less noise to keep him up for his daily sleep-ins. The only problem is I couldn't confront him because I had no solid proof. So that's what I set out to do. I had to dig a little more into my small rainy day fund, but I managed to swing by an electronics store and picked up the cheapest pet cam I could find. The bonus of its budget price was the fact that it was still compatible with my old as dirt smartphone. I was set to be able to monitor somewhere in my house while I was away. The framing was planned to focus on the fridge. I left the camera between some old books pointed into the small dining area, where I set the fridge on the table. If the landlord was sneaking in and pinching the meat, I would have full view of it. Of course, at first nothing was caught, but I made sure to walk past my landlord with a butcher's bag in hand. He made his snide comment about if I'm going to eat all of it, and I planted my seed here. I told him I was saving it for the next day. This way he knew it'd be waiting for him if he broke into my apartment. The next day work went as usual, with my usual grievances with travel. I was anxious to get home and review the tapes. When I got home, all that lay before me was a mess of a scene. My kitchen table was collapsed, the fridge was busted open on the floor, and the chairs were all scratched up around the legs. This didn't make sense. While investigating, another realization dawned on me. Buster was missing. I straightaway stormed to my landlord's room and didn't stop banging on the door until he answered. I did not hold back, yelling at him about what was going on, throwing shade about some of my ideas, which all made him scrunch his face in an anger I'd often see on his red face. When he returned my words, all he threw was that he heard a noise in my apartment, and when he opened the door, Buster ran out. I wanted to go in further, to tear down everything he said, and to pry the confession out of his meaty lips, but I prioritized finding Buster above all else and left. I spent hours scouring the streets for him, but ultimately it was a fruitless search. I'd have to put in for him at the pound and local vets, I thought, and resigned to investigating what happened at my apartment. I looked over the mess. The daunting thought of having to clean it up swept to the back of my mind. The camera had a light which indicated that there was some footage captured. I reached for the camera to review any movements caught. The first signs of movement was just one of the dining chairs, slowly sliding and being jostled around. I was confused at this. If my landlord had walked in, I'd have seen him by now. Next, the other chair started moving with slight bumps and nudges. The sound was awful. Any sound peaked the audio, so it was either a fuzzy silence or the berating of my ears. The scraping sounds were grating enough, but soon there was a horrendous scraping sound that was a cut above any noise I'd heard thus far. The table wobbled with each scrape until it looked like one of the legs gave in and the table came over. I just heard the sound of something rummaging in the fridge and the sound slowly crawling away. Did my landlord somehow know of the camera and so crawled in to steal the meat? No way, that would be preposterous. But what other options were there? My idea of catching him in the act didn't work, so I needed a new plan. And when I was finished with the camera, I looked around at the damages. The leg indeed looked like it had been haphazardly hacked away. Rough, inaccurate grooves marred around where the leg eventually gave in. The chair legs had similar grooves up to thigh height, though the chairs were still intact. I was dumbfounded. There was no way the landlord somehow knew about the camera and took to crawling with a saw to keep out of shot. It was impossible, but I had nothing else to work on for any other theory. Touching the fridge was a lost cause, so I took to the route. I placed my camera in a new spot, between a plastic plant facing the front door. There was no way I could miss him this time, even if he crawled. Sleep did not come easy, and work the next day was rough. All I could think about was Buster, and what I'd do to the landlord when I caught him red-handed. When I came home, things looked untouched. Until I entered the kitchen and saw the fridge door, now relocated onto the floor, wide open, the light casting a yellow tinge to my small bookshelf. Furious, I slammed it shut and reviewed the camera. It started with me leaving the house. Then nothing, nothing, nothing. I kept skipping through, nothing. Then I was puzzled when the only movement I saw was myself re-entering the apartment. My mind reeled with ideas. Did the camera miss a segment? Did the landlord have another way and I didn't know about? Had he somehow erased the footage? Nothing was missing from the fridge, because at this point my food supplies were running on fumes from the amount of raids happening. But this had another effect. The scratches from the dining room lead further in. This boiled my blood, because if my landlord was trying to frame my dog, then scratches now were proof it wasn't him the whole time, since he was no longer home. Investigating around, new scratches stood out from the otherwise cleaner walls and went straight into my bedroom. I hesitantly approached, wondering if whatever banged up the fridge hadn't left. The room was relatively undisturbed. The only things standing out were a few scuffs here and there. I locked up my door, grabbed my fridge and placed it on my bedroom drawers. I grabbed the camera and didn't even bother hide it. I just placed it, ready to watch anyone enter the door. With the fridge still in frame, I turned it on ready for the next day and just collapsed into bed, exhausted from everything I was dealing with. I woke up in the early hours, light still not yet gracing the streets, and the alert light on the camera showing that something was recorded. I figured it might have been me rolling around in bed, but when I sat up, my entire lower half felt moist. Had I been sweating? There was no way I spilled something on me, and it was too consistent over me to be a little accident. I saw my blanket and bed frame had been marred with marks and scratches. This was the final straw. Vandalizing the apartment was one thing. Stealing what little I had was another. But this was a blatant threat on my well-being. I stormed to the camera to check what was recorded from the night before. The footage was grainy. The night view on the cheap setup was a lower standard than what it could pick up in the day, and the day quality left a lot to be desired. The greenish-gray tinge was nauseating, with pixels blotting around as the camera struggled to pick up the faintest of outlines, but it did pick something up. Slowly, in the twilight hours of the morning, my bedroom door was slowly pushed open. It was obvious someone was coming in, and they were being deliberate with how sneaky they were being. I stared intently, trying to make out the chubby outline of my landlord. hoping it was just him, since that was more preferable than some deranged stalker or a serial killer. But my God, was it much worse. Around waist height, a strange shape slowly stumbled in. It wasn't short though, it was long, on all fours as it slithered its way in. The closest it resembled was a Komodo dragon, a strange reptilian base, but anything beyond that was alien to me and my limited knowledge of the animal world. The back was covered in spiny bones, something I can only vaguely liken to quills of a porcupine, but nothing I'd ever seen had any of that size. Its claws were sharp, but not in a clean way, like sharpened rock, rather than knife-like blades. It waddled its way over to my bed and seemed to sniff me out with a few pokes of its split tongue. My breath froze as I watched it slowly clamber up the foot of my bed, my slumbering self gently stirring with the movements on the mattress. The creature opened its mouth wider and wider, and just as it looked to be as big as it could get, unhinged its jaw to distend the width of its maw. It scooped up my feet with ease and slid forward inch by inch, freezing many times as it did so, seemingly taking its time to keep me in my paralyzed state. Eventually it got up to my hips, just below my belly, and froze. Its lips pushed a few times on the pudge of my gut, and it just stayed there for an awkward amount of time, seemingly mulling over what its next move it. Eventually its decision was made, and it slowly slid away, releasing my lower half from its jaw, and slithered out of my room. After that, the footage cut. I froze there. Everything I felt I knew had crashed around me, and a terrifying reality I didn't want to admit was sinking into my head. And Buster had seen this thing and gotten out while he could. It has been feeding on any meat product for weeks and had almost gotten big enough to eat me. Almost? I went back and checked out the markings around the house, how they started small, but each newer set has gotten deeper, longer, higher. It's growing at a rapid pace, and it's figured out that it's nearly big enough to eat me. I've received a call from the pound. Buster has been found. I've spent the last of my money on a ticket out of the city. I'm going to swing by, pick him up, and leave with what I can carry on my back. Whatever is going on here will have to resolve without me. This is my landlord's problem now. Next story. Before I begin, let me say I love my wife very much and still do. When I said for better or for worse, I meant it. I don't love what she has become is the problem. The only reason I'm even typing this out is to have my chest to someone. When my wife and I had been trying to have a baby for a little over a year now, but hadn't succeeded until I bought some takeout at this new restaurant near our home. Molly had miscarried the previous week and was sulking around in a depressive state ever since. She hadn't been eating very much and had quarantined herself into our dark bedroom to grieve over our latest loss. I know Chinese food is her favorite, and it might be the only way to get a full meal in her. It was a nice evening overall. We watched a comedy on TV. Molly gratefully gobbled down the orange chicken with fried rice, and afterwards we cracked open our fortune cookies. Mine said something about working hard. I didn't really care, but I remember her as clear as day. Now is the time, it read in tiny black letters, till in that moment she pounced on me. We made love most of the night, and a few weeks later my wife was pregnant again. Once she made it past the 2-month mark, we were comfortable enough to tell our family and friends without fear of another miscarriage. I felt like all of our troubles were behind us and looked forward to starting our perfect family together. So little did I know, that was far from the end of our problems. The pregnancy so far has been pretty standard aside from one thing. Molly's cravings for Chinese food was obscene. At first she would go through multiple cup of noodles a day, or she would cook all of our white rice and douse it in soy sauce, which wasn't that bad. It was even sort of cute at first to joke about. After weeks of this, the only thing I could get her to eat was her special order from that same restaurant. It was almost like an addiction, but anyone who's had a pregnant partner in the past will tell you that you never want to be on their bad side. I was having to make daily trips after work to the damned place, and the smell of sriracha had just begun to make me gag. And she was about 24 weeks into the pregnancy. When I went to pick up our latest orange chicken fix, I found that the place had been shut down and boarded up with tape covering the perimeter. It seemed a little much for a potential health code violation, but it made me worried about the oriental chicken-crazed monster that was sleeping next to me at night. I knew this news would upset her greatly, so I drove to a different restaurant and got the same meal for her just in case she was still hungry. When I got home, I broke the news to her, but then offered the takeout box as a substitute. I expected her to be a little bummed, but nothing could have prepared me for her reaction. She grabbed the box and opened it frantically near the kitchen counter. She didn't even get silverware, she just dove into the food with her bare hand. She scooped the warm food into her mouth in a primal way before suddenly halting. She frowned and threw the whole box against the wall, screeching like a banshee that it wasn't the same. I was dumbfounded for a few minutes, unsure of what to do until she stormed off to our bedroom and slammed the door behind her. I convinced myself that her hormones must be the culprit behind her aggressive behavior and proceeded to clean up the mess she left behind. The next few days, I dreaded coming home from work. The woman I married was barely recognizable in comparison to the swollen-bellied maniac that took her place, and she refused to eat anything except for her special order. But there's no way I could get it to her. She went 4 full days without so much as a nibble, and it made her go a little nuts. The first day I came back without it, she wouldn't let me touch her anymore, and would simply scream as if I were beating her without mercy. The police even showed up after a while to make sure I wasn't battering her. On the second day, she actually slapped me, but she's not very strong. Her nails did scratch me though, and I had to lie about it when my coworkers asked about its organs. The day after that, she just sat on my lap and cried. The collar of my shirt was covered in snot and drool as she wept for her beloved meal. She begged and begged, but I just couldn't make her understand that it was gone. On the 4th day, she locked me out of our room. She just slid my clothes and toothbrush under the door, then forced me onto the couch that night, the hunger pains keeping her bedridden after that. I had planned to talk to her doctor about fears of her starving when I came home again on the 5th day, ready for howling screams of disapproval, but instead saw her in the kitchen with a big smile on her face. Just that morning, she was hacking bile into our toilet and cursing me for neglect. Now she was my sweet Molly, cooking what smelled and looked like a stew. I smiled and hugged her gently, rubbing her belly with one hand. It had felt like a lifetime since the last time I held the woman I married. I asked why she seemed so chipper now, and she said that once she ate something, she felt a lot better and realized she didn't need her special order. I was relieved to say the least, and so was my wallet, but it was only for a short while. I wanted to believe the woman I shared a home with was back to her normal self again. Of course, I wouldn't be writing this if I had been that lucky. It was about 2 weeks later that I noticed all of the missing pet posters going up around our neighborhood. The standard stuff really that I didn't pay too much attention to until my neighbor John stopped me before I went into my domicile for the rest of the day. And you know it's dangerous to have a cat with a baby in the house. Could suffocate the poor thing, he told me, which I was seriously confused by since we don't have a cat. I explained this to him, even admitting my allergy to their fur, but he insisted that 3 days ago my not quite back to normal wife left our home and came back with a mewing pet carrier. He asked if she needed help, but he said she ignored him and quickly went inside. I asked Molly about it, but she said our neighbor was a nosy bastard and she never brought a cat home with her. I believed her, chalking it up to a lonely old man wanting some brief company, until we flipped on the news that night. We had a nice evening in home with Molly in a good mood until we saw our local news reporting in front of the restaurant she had been obsessed with. The young reporter informed our town that the repulsive restaurant had been serving cats as chicken, but her wife quickly changed the channel as I gagged and remembered all of the orange chicken, and even the few meals I had eaten from there. This is going to sound silly, but I couldn't get the story John told me out of my head after that either. There's plenty of things we could have talked about, but why on earth would he make Molly bringing home a cat was painting a disturbing picture of my wife now. I had a feeling what she was up to while I was working, but I had no proof. Not until her baby shower, that is. I wasn't invited, like most husbands, so I got the house to myself for the day. I killed most of the time with video games, but my controller's batteries had died. We have a small cabinet above our stove where we keep flashlights, batteries, and other miscellaneous items. It's above my head and I can barely see inside of without a stool, so I grabbed one to make my life easier. While I retrieved the batteries, I saw an old butter tub that I never put in there. Obviously, my wife must have done it, but I wanted to know what it was there for. I took it from the cabinet, noting it made a soft jingling sound, and popped it open easily. I wish I hadn't now. What I saw staring back at me were tiny, brightly colored collars. Most were equipped with bells and even name tags. I picked one up, looking it over. It was bright green, white polka dots, silver bell, and a name tag. I didn't read it though. I was more focused on reddish-brown smudges that covered the inside of the bowl and tiny braided collars. I thought I was going to have an anxiety attack until I heard the front door open. I quickly put the collars away and took the batteries I needed before playing the dutiful husband and helping get all the new items from our car for the baby room. She's 36 weeks along in her pregnancy now, and I still haven't confronted her about finding the collars. I want to wait until after the kids are born, so she doesn't hurt herself to spite me. According to the previous ultrasounds, we're expecting 3 perfectly healthy babies. I know, triplets. A little crazy, right? We went from barely able to have children to having 3 miracles overnight. However, it's not as fantastic as it sounds. Turns out, around the same time my wife had her last miscarriage, she ordered these organic fertility pills online, and apparently they really worked. Of course, I didn't find this out until the day we realized she was having multiple babies. Our most recent visit to the clinic revealed their sexes: 2 little boys and a precious girl. I can't wait to see them. They'll make this period in our lives worth it. I remember thinking as I gazed at the monochrome screen. I was on the precipice of tears when something my wife said caught my attention. "It's like we're having a whole litter," she said with a toothy grin stretched across her face. That unsettled me, especially the way she looked at the screen with her wide eyes. I don't want to believe my wife would eat our children, but it happens in nature all the time if you think about it. I had a pet hamster as a kid that ate all of her babies. It freaked the hell out of me then. The more I look at how my wife gazes at her swollen belly, the hungrier her eyes seem to me. I think once the children are able to leave the hospital, I'm going to take them and divorce my wife. However, if she resists, I'll have to put down the feral mother to protect her litter.